Okay, members, we're going to start in 1 minute, so if we could take our seats, please. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the joint meeting of the Scrutiny Committees. Before we begin the formal meeting, I have some housekeeping information that I need to share. First, please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the Council's YouTube page. Second, the Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and to post to social media. Third, can I ask everyone turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. In the event of an evacuation alarm sounding a continuous sound, all persons should vacate the building by way of the nearest available exit and proceed directly to the assembly point in the plaza near the multi-storey car park. If the alarm is an intermittent sound, this indicates a lockdown. Attendees should stay in their seats and await further instructions. As per normal rules, if you wish to speak, please ensure that you raise your hand and you will be invited to address the meeting by the chair. If a vote is required, all votes will be taken via the voting cards on your tables, unless a recorded vote is requested, which will be taken in the normal way. I would remind members that this meeting is being live streamed, so please make sure that when you speak, you use your microphone. I will now move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the nomination of a chair, in accordance with Part 4, Section 8, Scrutiny Committee Procedure Rules, Section 13, Joint Meetings of Scrutiny Committees, which states that the chair will be appointed from among the chairs of the committees who are holding the meeting this evening. The chairs present tonight are Councillor Day, Councillor Fitzgerald, Councillor Asif Shahid and Councillor Skibstead. Can I therefore ask the committees if there are any nominations? Councillor Skibstead.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to nominate Councillor Asif Shahid as chair of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a member of the committee that would like to second that nomination? Councillor Ormston?
Happy to second.
Thank you. Are there any further nominations for this appointment? As there are no further nominations, can I ask if any member of the committee objects to the nomination of Councillor Asif Shahid for chair of this meeting? I see no formal objections, so could I therefore ask Councillor Shahid to take position of chair for this meeting? Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gents. The Scrutiny Committee committees are meeting tonight to discuss the Peterborough Local Draft Plan. This meeting is an important opportunity for all members of each Scrutiny Committee to come together to scrutinise the local plan as part of the public consultation process. I will now move to item 2 on the agenda. Apologies for absence, Charlotte. This could take a while.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Saqib Farouk, Councillor Geraghty, Councillor Hemraj, Councillor Jenkins, Councillor Imtiaz Ali, Councillor Bisbee, Councillor Newman Iqbal, Councillor Mahmood, Councillor Rangzeb, Councillor Ray, Councillor Ann Shahid, Councillor Warren and Councillor Strangward. And from apologies from co-optees Aziz, Bradbury, Dorks, Norton, Reid, Stone, Tyrrell Jones, Parish Councillor Hardy and Parish Councillor Young. Councillors Steve Allen, Mohammed Farouk and John Howard are in attendance as substitutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Agenda item number 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest and whipping declarations, please? No, thank you very much. We will now move to agenda item number 4, Peterborough Draft Local Plan, which can be found on pages 3 to 198 of the agenda pack. Members would have received notice from 2 members of the public that they wish to speak on this item. I will invite them to address the meeting in turn and they will have 3 minutes to make their statement. Mr Chilcott, please would you come forward to address the meeting? And you have 3 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Martin Chilcott, Chair of Protect Rural Peterborough, an organisation set up from concerned residents in Castor and Aylesworth in 2016 in opposition to development by Homes England north and around the village. In terms of the local plan consideration, I think it's worth noting that the reason that Scrutiny is considering this before Cabinet is because I raised it personally at Planning Committee on Tuesday. In other words, what's the point? What on earth is Scrutiny going to scrutinise if Cabinet made a decision this morning? And that was changed this morning. I was advised just before that meeting. The three areas I just wanted to address are we feel this is the wrong process, the wrong growth and the wrong site. So they relate to the overall plan as well as the specific site at Castor and Aylesworth. The wrong process, well, at least we've got Scrutiny, have got some scrutinising to do now, but also the fact that there are three vital reports missing. The site evidence report, which in the presentation which we saw this morning by Gemma at the Cabinet is RAG rated, the growth evidence report, and the local plan sustainability report, which sets out the options for the policies and sites that have been ruled out and ruled in. So you haven't got any of that. So members would only have that information when members of the public are, if it's put out to consultation. There's also the issue about, talking about public consultation, the issues and options consultation. There are several areas in that have been disrespected in this draft local plan. And in terms of the wrong site, it's a very complex site. It requires £100 million of Homes England investment, we're told, to make it suitable for private developers to then build housing on it. And you can bet your bottom dollar that they'll want to build nice 4- and 5-bedroom posh houses at Castor. So we wonder whether that's a great use of the money. It's also very risky, this draft local plan, because there's a risk on evidence that has not been circulated amongst members. There's a risk in terms of the consultation has not been respected. There's a risk in terms of the site itself. And also the potential that it will become like North Stowe, which some of you may be familiar with, Homes England. It's just become a giant money pit. But I just want to bring you back to this. In the presentation by planners, it says the major criteria set out in the site assessment methodology, this is what you see in the site evidence report.
You've got around 10 seconds left, Mr. Chilcott.
Site availability, well, there's two reds in there. It says any site that scores red against any of the above is ruled out at the first stage of the assessment, and there are two reds in there. So why has the Castor and Aylesworth site not been, there we go, that's the Castor and Aylesworth site. Why has that not been ruled out?
If you could sum up, please. If you could commit to summing up, please.
That's basically it. I mean, last time this site had 10 reds, twice as many as any other site being considered. Nothing's changed. The site's there. You can see up there, those are the areas of national nature reserves and triple SIs in red, and the barrier, the effectively protection area.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chilcott.
And running through the middle of it.
Mr. Chilcott, we need to move on now. Thank you very much.
Okay, go on.
Mr. McKean, can I ask you to bring your presentation, please? And again, you've got 3 minutes-ish.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bear with me while I stand up and get myself sorted out of bed back. Dale McKean, I first moved into I in 1980, so I've been around for 40-odd years. I've spent 3 years on the parish council, and I've been a city councillor for 2 years for the Eye and Thorney ward in the past. So, in the last 10 years census of 2021, Eye Village has had an additional 501 houses, making it 2,300 houses. There's another 265 outline and another 135 in this draft plan, which brings it to 270 houses. Including those in the plan, it will mean a 65% increase in the 6,500 residents since 2001. 6,500 residents. We were told in previous local plans designated Eye as a major village for growth that the village would be provided with infrastructure needed. Why has the oversubscribed school not been expanded to 3 form entries? Why have the issues with the rat runs past its school and the high street not been sorted? Why has the new health centre not been provided, as the current one is too small and has been too small for many years? Why is this site 6231 a Class B8 industrial site been proposed in the green wedge for I? PCC policy LP44 prohibits industrial and housing developments on green wedge. This means a significant encroachment towards I, sets a precedent for other developers to come forward and submit their industrial sites into green wedges. I would lose its rural character and visual amenity looking forward. As an example of a B8 class development, there's one at Oxney Grange at the moment that is 15 metres high. That is as big as this roof, and it's 4 double-decker buses on top of each other. That's the type of site a B8 site is. Why is this site in flood zones? It's in flood zone 2 and it's in flood zone 3, and the surface water flooding opposite, if anybody goes into the PE1 site and tries to shop at Aldi, they will realise what I'm referring to. This site is in the green wedge, and the implications is that we will not be able to get rid of the rat run problem and the log jam that's coming down to junction 8 from I and the A47 throughout the day. In the morning, it is absolute chaos and it's absolutely gridlock. We've got 2 lanes, about 30 metres of 2 lanes. Parnwell has got 3 lanes. A15, 4 lanes. Frank Perkins Parkway, 4 lanes. All we've got is 2. So you put that site in there and we can't put those roads onto junction 8 and resolve this issue, which creates a rat run past our school.
Could you begin summing up, please, Mr. McKean?
I've just got 2 more if you wouldn't mind. So,
You've got 20 seconds.
56-4 is for 10 houses on the I Street. It's right next door to a grade 2 and in the conservation area and opposite a thatched cottage, grade 2. Why squeeze 10 houses in? Why not put a health centre in there, which we desperately need? More suitable would be 6 houses. What is needed is a specific policy.
Mr. McKean, that's your time, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any clarity questions?
Not as yet, thank you. May I invite Councillor Thalborn, Cabinet Member for Growth and Regeneration, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Through you.
Sorry, can I just ask the gentleman to sit back at the public gallery, please? Thank you. Sorry.
Is what, sorry?
Sorry, not you, sorry.
Dive through the window. Thank you, Chair. Peterborough is one of the fastest growing cities in the UK, and we have in place policies to help guide future growth and development to 2036. However, we need to produce a new local plan to take into account changes to national policy, the new mandatory housing needs requirements to ensure the council can maintain a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites, ensure a sufficient supply of future employment land to attract new businesses, jobs and opportunities to Peterborough while supporting existing businesses, and to meet our climate change ambitions. The first stage of the public consultation took place in summer 2023. At this earlier stage, the issues and options document did not identify the precise sites required to deliver the housing and jobs growth targets. As part of the earlier consultation process, the council asked the public, developers, landowners, agents and parish councils to suggest sites for future housing and employment provision that are available and deliverable. All suggested sites have been assessed against a detailed assessment criteria, and the preferred sites have been included in the draft plan and shown on the draft policies map. This has involved a huge amount of time and analysis by the planning team. I am pleased to bring this to you guys. We was going to consider it a cabinet. It became obvious that cabinet before scrutiny was not a good idea, so we've deferred cabinet decision till we get your comments coming back. So we're asking for comments and scrutiny of the local plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thalborn. In addition to Councillor Thalborn, we have Ingrid Hooley, Service Director for Growth and Regeneration, Gemma Wildman, Planning Policy Manager, and Councillor Ellis, Cabinet Member for Environment and Transport. Gemma Wildman, I believe, has a presentation, and if you're able to address any of the issues brought up by Ms Chilcott, Mr McLean. That would be much appreciated, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully that's presentation share. Right, good evening everyone. Today I'd like to present to you just a brief introduction to the local plan and a bit of background. So I'd start by talking to you about the background to the local plan production. I'll go through the timetable, talk about some of the policies, the site selection process, how that led to the growth strategy, go through some of the proposed sites, and then talk about the public consultation and the next steps, what's going to happen next. So hopefully you're all aware that the current local plan was adopted in July 2019. That sets the growth target to 2036. This is the document that is currently used by planning officers when determining planning applications. The plan is now more than 5 years old and therefore is required by national policy to be reviewed. So since the local plan was adopted in 2019, there's been quite a few changes. There's been several changes to national policy and guidance. There's been quite a lot of new legislation brought in, such as biodiversity net gain and requirements about climate change. There's also been a new government setting new growth requirements, including the new mandatory housing targets. So this slide is a summary of the timetable, which is officially called the Local Development Scheme. It's a statutory requirement that the plan is prepared in accordance with this. This is a version that was updated in February this year. It shows that the first stage, it sets out the statutory stages of consultation. It shows that the first stage of consultation was carried out in July 2023 on the issues and options document. And this shows that we're at the second stage of draft consultation, with that due to take place in April and May 2025, subject to approval by Cabinet. Following the public consultation on the draft, the planning policy team will review all the comments and review the evidence and make any necessary changes or updates to the draft plan and prepare a submission version or a proposed submission version. This is the version that the council would like to see adopted and approved and become the plan that's used by the council. But before that can happen, there has to be another round of consultation on that version. Then instead of the council receiving the comments and dealing with those comments themselves, we just process the comments, and then the draft, the submission plan, all the evidence base and all the comments are submitted to government, who appoint an independent planning inspector. And it's then up to this appointed planning inspector to review all that evidence and all those comments and carry out public examination. And it's at the public examination that anybody with outstanding objections could be invited to come along and present that to the inspector. Following the hearings, the inspector will take all the information into consideration and issue a report to the council that will say whether the plan is suitable to be adopted or not, and it will set out any modifications. And if there anything that's classed as major modifications, then there'll be consultation on those. And it's only after that that the plan can then come back to full council and for it to be adopted. And it's at that point that the local plan will then be used in decision making, become the adopted plan for Peterborough. And that's due to happen by the end of 2026. As I mentioned, the first stage of consultation was carried out in summer 2023. We received good feedback from very different people, different groups. As part of the consultation, we also carried out a call for sites. As was mentioned, we asked people to suggest land to us. All those sites have been put into a document and presented on the website so people can see all the sites that have been suggested. We also published a key issues report that summarises the outcomes of the consultation. So, as I said, as part of the call for sites, there was a number of sites suggested to us. This map shows all the different land that was proposed, and as I said, it's been available on the website and as an interactive map. So you can see the different range of sites across the area that all these sites have been put into the system and have been assessed as part of the process. So now I'd like to just sort of start talking a bit about the draft local plan. You can see that this is a list of the different policies that I was going closer. So these are the list of the policies that are contained in the draft plan. I won't go through into detail of all the different policies. That is a summary set out in your report. But just to highlight some of the areas where there's been some changes. So, as I mentioned, climate change, there's quite a lot of new guidance and information around that. There's been some updates to some of the housing needs policies because of the new government and the emphasis and change towards the need for social rented houses. Changes to the natural environment policies is, again, there's been quite a lot of change, particularly the introduction of biodiversity net gain. There's also been quite a few changes around how the local plan housing target is calculated. So this slide just provides a very brief overview and summary and explains why some of the process has been paused and delayed over the last year. But when work originally started, we were looking at 936 homes per year. Then the new government introduced a new process, a new method, and that suggested that the increase was going to, the target was going to increase to 1,068 homes per year. And work was done to provide those sites. Then when the figures actually came out officially in just before Christmas, they still increased our target, but it wasn't as much as expected to 1,006. So that gives us a requirement of 20,120 new homes to be delivered by 2044. Just as a slight background and a note at the bottom of this slide, it shows that the current adopted local plans target is 982, and on average since the base date of the current local plan in 2016 to 2044, the average delivery rate is 1,010 dwellings per year. So you can see that those figures are fairly similar to what the new target is, so they are realistic and deliverable targets for the area. So the government's mandatory minimum housing target is for on average 1,006 homes per year, which gives us 20,120 by 2044. But a lot of that growth and those sites are already known. As at the 31st of March 2024, which is our latest monitoring data, it shows that 9,172 dwellings had the benefit of planning permission, so are committed and those sites can go ahead. There's also a number of sites in the existing local plan that don't have planning permission but have been assessed and are still available and deliverable and have been determined they can come forward. So that includes some of the big sites that around in the station quarter and I think places such as some of the urban extensions at Norwood. So that means that of completely new sites, we need to find approximately 6,200 new dwellings to meet our minimum housing target. So that's for housing. In terms of employment land, we've appointed consultants to carry out an employment needs study, and this has identified the need for 205 hectares of industrial and warehousing and 40 square metres of office space. As the same with the housing sites, a number of those sites are already committed, and we've already identified 100 hectares of employment land that has the benefit of planning permission. This includes areas such as Red Brick Farm. So I'd just like to go through and talk about the site assessment process. So as I said, all sites have been assessed against a detailed site assessment criteria covering a wide range of different assessment criteria that are set out in the draft methodology report that we published when we carried out the call for sites. All sites are scored against a colour coding system to show where there's different harm or that there's risk for different sites to identify and help us select the most suitable, sustainable and deliverable sites. As well as it just being a desk-based assessment based on GIS, looking at distances to different criteria, how close it is to services and facilities, or to what sort of constraints there are on site. We also include the professional assessment. So the sites have been reviewed and assessed by other council departments, so such as the transport team, the natural environment, the historic environment team and the education department to provide feedback on their views of the sites and suitability to be carried forward. But not all assessment criteria are equal, and that's one reason why we use colour coding rather than scores. Some criteria would mean that a site is unsuitable and cannot be brought forward. So one of those is the site actually available? Can it be delivered? Whether or not it's within minerals and waste safeguarding area. Also, if the site is at risk of flooding. So in accordance with national policy, if a site, the requirement is to pick the sites and areas at lowest risk of flooding. So if a site is, more than 50% of the site is located in flood zone 3, which is the highest risk of flooding for housing, then that site is ruled out at the earliest stage of the process, as it wouldn't meet our criteria, and we have to look at the other sites first. In terms of employment, employment in national policy is classed as a less vulnerable use, and therefore sites can be selected that are in flood zone 2 in the first sieve of sites. Another major criteria is proximity to hazardous apparatus, which can include things like the gas compressor stations or gas pipelines. As was pointed out in the presentation, that some of the pipelines do go through some of the larger sites that have been suggested to us. And as part of the assessment process, we look at the proportion of the site that would include, and whether or not there is still sufficient land that can be delivered outside of the different buffer zones around the gas pipelines. Another criteria that rules a site out is proximity to nationally important habitats. So if a site is actually located within a protected wildlife site, it is ruled out. We haven't had any sites suggested to us this time, but in the past there has been, and that would be an automatically rejected site. So I said, yes, sites that score red against us at this stage of the assessment process aren't carried forward, and it's the first sieve. So a good example would be sites, land to the east of the city is in high risk of flooding. Most of the area out in the Fens is flood zone 3, and that does mean that there's limited growth in areas such as Thorney and Newborough, as they would score red for the sites for housing, suitable for housing. So this slide here, and this was part of the committee report as well, shows the proposed sites that are included in the draft local plan. And I'll go through in a bit more detail some of the areas, but the majority, if this works, and you can see my mouse here, the majority of the growth is within the city centre or the existing urban area, including the urban extension, so remaining development at Hampton, Great Haddon, and then there's also the showground site, which is allocated in the current local plan, and Norwood and Paston, which are in the current local plan, and Norwood hasn't yet got planning permission. There's also additional land proposed to the showground that isn't in the current plan. It does also include 2 new urban new settlements. We have land south of Market Deeping that's proposed for just over 1,055 homes, and also land to the north of Castor and Aylesworth, north of the A47, which is proposed for a total of 3,000 homes with 1,800 deliverable during the plan period. So this slide shows you the proportion of growth and the growth strategy. So it shows that within the urban area, the majority of growth is either within the urban area or within the urban extensions. 13% of the growth is proposed to be within the new settlements and 6% within the villages. The growth strategy also includes a windfall allowance, and windfall is classified as something that's not known or not allocated in the plan. So this can be 1 or 2 infill developments, or it could be a site that wasn't known or not available at this point of doing this work that does come forward sometime during the plan, the 20-year plan period. And we have evidence and information that shows and justifies that level of windfall allowance. So with some of the proposed urban extensions, you can see these are sites where the majority of growth is. These are sites that are either under construction or have or about to have planning permission, and there's some additional land proposed as part of the showground. And there's 2 new, as I mentioned, 2 new urban new settlements at north of Castor and Aylesworth and south of Market Deeping. So for employment land, the majority of employment land is within the urban area, the existing general employment areas, and the plan identifies a few sites which are listed here. This includes a new strategic allocation, land to the northeast of Stanground. There's the additional land at Palmwell Way and a few other sites, and including some land at north of Castor and Aylesworth, which is part of a mixed use development to include employment and other uses as part of that development. So that's just a very quick overview of what's contained in the draft local plan. Now I'd just like to talk a bit about what will happen next if approved by Cabinet and how the consultation will work. So the current dates proposed are for consultation to take place between the 11th of April and the 29th of May for 7 weeks. We want to try and make it as easy as possible for people to be able to view the plan. So there'll be a PDF version of the full plan available on the website, but then we've also created an online interactive summary map, or story map, that is a simpler version for people to read through, and it brings up the maps relevant to the sections of the plan it's talking about, so it's much more easier and user-friendly. There's also a short summary leaflet highlighting some of the main issues, and as well as an interactive policies map, the same as we had before, where people can zoom in, look at the site, click on it, and find more information about what site areas, how many dwellings are proposed, or hectares of employment land. There'll also be copies available. A copy will be available at the town hall and also in local libraries. And for people to make comments, there'll be an online form. They'll be able to download a copy of the form and email that to us. And there'll also be paper copies available in local libraries or people can print the form and then post them into us as well. So I talked about this a few minutes ago as well, but just to remind people the process and the steps still to go. So the local plan is due to go out for public consultation in April and May. Once the consultation closes, the local plan team will prepare and all the documents are prepared, review all the comments submitted, update all the evidence-based documents and the draft plan, and prepare the submission version. Towards the end of the year, the submission version will come, proposed submission version will come to Cabinet and then full council to approve again the post-submission version as the version I'd like to see adopted, and also approve it for further public consultation. That consultation is due to take place in early 2026, and then the document will then be submitted to government to appoint the planning inspector. And it's from that point onwards, the process is kind of out of the hands of the council. It's then up to the planning inspector and they set the timetable. But it is estimated that the plan should be available and adopted by the end of 2026. So that's the end of my presentation, and now open for questions.
Lovely, thank you very much, Gemma. Before I open the floor, I know we're going to be flitting around the report, so if you could ask your question one at a time. If you've got more than one question, ask it one at a time, please. Is that okay? Thank you. Questions, please. Nick Sanford.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask a question on Gemma's presentation relating back to some of the points that Mr. Chilcott made, because I think you did ask her if you could answer some of those points. One of the points he made was that apparently the committee hasn't got 3 key documents that it needs. Now, I've actually looked at page 132 of the draft plan, paragraph 14.1. It talks about how the sites were actually chosen, and it said the site selection process is set out in the site evidence report to be published in sort of April 2025, which explains the detailed methodology and the criteria by which the site were chosen. So I've been involved with Scrutiny for over 20 years in Peterborough, and I'm always keen that when people are scrutinising something, they have all the actual information that they need. So if part of our job this evening is to look at these areas that have been chosen for development and to assess whether they should be in the plan or not in the plan, how can we do that if one of the key documents that we need hasn't actually been published?
So, as it says, all the evidence-based documents are to be published as part of the public consultation, and that's the form of the public consultation, is to allow people to provide those comments and feedback, and all the information will be available there. The assessment process has been carried out, and this has been helped inform discussions with the local plan member working group and others to see what the proposed site should be.
So I need to come back on that, because that's the public responding to the consultation on the basis of the information they've got. This committee this evening, or this joint committee, is carrying out a scrutiny exercise on the basis that we have, and the fact is, as Mr. Chilcott pointed out, and we don't have one of the key papers, which is the one that sets out the criteria whereby these sites have been chosen. So how can we carry out effective scrutiny?
This is, all I can say is this is the same process we followed with the previous local plans, and the information has always been provided as part of the public consultation. You're being asked to approve the Cabinet being asked to approve the plan for public consultation.
Anyone else wish to come in on that at all? No? Okay. Councillor Hogg.
I'm just, I see from the map there's quite a large area for employment land northeast of Stanground, or King's Dyke. It seems to me that I'm trying to work out that there's quite a large area, and presumably that is going to be for industrial purposes rather than sort of offices and what have you. So what I'm worried about is how do we get people on and off that land? Has that been looked at? Is it because it's all very well putting a coloured circle around a bit of land, but it has to integrate with the infrastructure in terms of roads and what have you. How does it work basically?
Yeah, so I was just getting a copy of the plan. I forgot to get out to just check something there. Yes, so the site proposed to the north of Stanground, the strategic employment site, that's been assessed. There's been a transport assessment carried out as well, but there is a specific policy in the plan that sets out some of the criteria that must be met for that site to come forward, and that does include about the need for the transport assessment and study to be carried out as part of any planning application. The local plan looks at the cumulative impacts overall of the transport impacts of the sites.
Okay. Councillor Boyce, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a number of questions. I'll ask them one at a time if that's okay. The first one, as you're aware, we're one of the fastest growing cities in the country with the lowest disposable income for residents. We have below average GPs, at least 40 less than we should have, with the fourth worst in the country for dentists, unhealthiest place to live in the country at 307th, assessed and highlighted by Health Watch, 18,000 people with kidney disease, and at a recent Adult and Health Scrutiny meeting we were presented with the Winter Health Plan, only to be told that the hospital beds located on the normally open top floor of the hospital were already full before Christmas. How will this plan actually help us with those health issues if we're going to continue with this super fast growth?
I'm not sure exactly how we can help, but what we can do is say that the plan has been assessed taking into account the need for different doctor surgeries, and that will be part of the form part of the consultation with public health. I mean, public health were one of the groups that commented on the sites as well, the council's officers. Anything else to say?
Okay, my next question, building the open country.
One of the issues with the growth is the type of growth we've had over the past decade or so. So disposable income is the statistic that you should use in Peterborough. It's the way to actually solve a number of the issues you talked about. This local plan is part of that, of getting more housing, good housing, social housing, rentable housing. That's more of a priority, but it's disposable income is the issue. And you're absolutely right, and growth should be about that, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure it is.
Okay, my next question, building the open countryside. Some of the sites proposed are to be an open countryside. How can this be justified when Peterborough is supposed to be the environment capital? Over the last 5 years, 17 of the 26 parish councils, along with a number of partners such as the Wildlife Trust, Natural England and even Peterborough City Council, have been carrying out various nature recovery projects in those parishes. Only last year, one of those parish councils was awarded the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Association of Local Councils Award for Environmental Projects. Clearly, those parishes will feel somewhat surprised and aggrieved to see that the proposals to include large-scale developments in open countryside. How will the council explain that that work they've been doing means nothing now, especially as the council is a partner in those projects?
Okay. Well, so we've been set mandatory housing targets, and we have to assess all the sites to pick the sites that we feel that are suitable, the most suitable, sustainable and deliverable sites to meet the growth target. And as I said, we've been through and assessed and looked at sites in the urban area and the urban extensions, and then gone to look at where they'll be suitable in other areas. And that does involve some development on the edge of settlements and existing areas in the countryside. But we do have to balance that against the need for growth and ensure we've picked the most suitable and sustainable and deliverable sites. And I think that's the key point, that we've got to meet the target to deliver the growth. If we don't, and we don't meet that target, we don't have the deliverable sites, these will be challenged at the local plan examination by developers who will bring forward sites. If the sites can't be delivered, then they'll be challenged on the 5-year land supply, and then we'll have speculative development coming forward on some of these sites, which the fact the plan is now 5 years old is already happening with some sites coming forward for planning applications outside the existing settlement boundaries.
One more for now, Councillor Boyce, then we'll come back to you after.
Thank you. Why do you think the Castor and Houser site has been recommended by planners with 3,000 dwellings, 1,800 number within the span of the life plan, and 7 hectares of employment land? This proposed site is located adjacent Castor Hanglands Nature Reserve, a triple SI site. The Wildlife Trust has already stated their objection to the proposal, saying It would have a devastating impact and create a barrier to species moving around the landscape. It would be better suited as a green lung for Peterborough and provide some much needed accessible natural green space. Also, what do you see as the main issues for the site regarding cost of infrastructure? Estimated to be £100 million. Would your proposal for the number of housing industrial units cover that cost for the infrastructure, or will the council once again need to pick up some of that cost?
So I'll start with the first part of the question, and if I do miss a point, please come on. So, as I said, all the sites have been assessed, and we've selected the most suitable, sustainable, and developable sites, livable sites even. And I forgot what the point was then. Carried out the assessment, looked at all the different constraints and issues, and this is the part of the public consultation. You know, if the Wildlife Trust or other people would like to make their comments and suggest where there are issues like this, then we can take those into account in informing the submission version. So that's the point of the public consultation. In terms of the site coming forward, as part of the assessment process, it is in one ownership. So in terms of deliverability, that makes things easier, quicker to come forward. But I'm not sure about the infrastructure requirements and numbers. Ingrid, are you able to help out with that part, please?
So some of this get answered. Can everyone hear me? Is that working? Yeah. Through the actual formal planning process, you know. So when the site comes forward, it obviously has to go to planning, and it's at that stage, you know, that the developers concerned have to show how are they going to bring that forward, and they have to show what the infrastructure requirements are. I'm not sure where this £100 million figure has come from for this site. That's a consideration for, you know, the developers and the owners of that land, and consideration for their viability of that site. You know, it's down to them. They think it's viable to bring that forward. Whatever their costs are, then that sits with them really. And in terms of the wildlife and the nature recovery area, again, that's part of the planning, the formal planning process. You know, when that site comes forward, this is part of the, if you know, once we're through consultation, if those sites remain in the local plan and that all of that's approved, then it is at that point when it comes to formal consultation that we'd be looking for mitigation around that, you know, how that developer's going to bring that site forward in a sustainable and environmentally friendly way and actually support the existing environment in that area. It becomes negotiation and discussion around that point, and potential investment by them in creating accessible green space and contributing to the kind of green space development and creating a benefit for the communities for the longer term.
Very quickly, yeah.
Thank you for that response. I do find it difficult to find, with what you've just said, how building 3,000 houses next to a triple SI nature reserve, how that can bring anything to the party with the natural species that's there. You know, what can they do to justify that next to a triple SI site?
It's a question that would be asked during the planning process. You know, that's what we'd be looking for and asking about. Homes England fully aware of that situation and the position of that, and that would be the discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Ormston, please. I think he's forgotten his question, haven't you? You're miles away.
Cool, blimey. Didn't see that one coming. Thank you. Just to echo what Mr. McKean was saying in regards to the green wedge, to be honest, I understand that there's certain policies and they're in the document, and I can understand that. But there's a little bit of weighing up to be done there, and I really struggle with having additional infrastructure, struggling in that area as it is, and having that extra unit there. We need employment, we need jobs, I'm not disputing that, but putting it on the green wedge is very concerning for me, and I think we're going to see an awful lot of public pushback. I just wonder whether it's worth trying to almost note this down now, rather than causing quite a big public fuss for something I don't think was going to go through personally. But I would love to hear the weighting, why we think it is in there on this draft stage.
So, yeah, we've got employment targets, and we want to try and meet the council's growth ambitions to increase skills and provide jobs, and also attract businesses to the area. So we need to have a good supply and range of employment land, and the options for housing, there was more than sufficient land suggested to us. So there was more options to select from, but for employment, there was less options of employment land.
Thank you. Councillor Elsey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Before I go on to the bit I want to raise, I've got two observations in terms of what I've heard. In terms of Gemma's statement that this is the way we've always done it, the fastest way to build a stagnant business is to continue to do things we've always done because we've always done it. What we should be doing is evaluating what we've done in the past, making sound observations of it and looking to do things better in the future is my first point. Second point, in terms of the planning and the onus on developers to come forward with coherent infrastructure plans, that wasn't the case on the showground, and that's been approved. So I'll now move on to the point that I want to raise. I'm not going to go over the areas of concern raised by others, though I broadly share their opinion, but I would like to focus on one particular area, one which affects us all and is emotive. Having reviewed the draft plan, there seems to be no policies either allocating land for a cemetery or providing a criteria-based policy against which an application for a cemetery would be considered. In fact, the draft local plan mentions the word cemetery only once at paragraph 10.2 as an example of community infrastructure required to support growth. That will be included in the infrastructure delivery schedule, which begs the question, has this been drafted, and if so, why haven't we got sight of it if we're here to scrutinise this local area plan? In terms of what we have at the moment, I refer to Bereavement Services response regarding the approved site in Great Haddon. Apparently the cemeteries that we currently have served us for 100 years, but we now only have 7 to 10 years between them at the current burial rate. Any new cemetery site would need to be large enough to provide ample space for C of E, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish and traveller communities. Also, space is required for mausolea, which is popular within the Italian community. A site of 25 acres, minimum 15, is required to provide 100 years of burials. That's a big site. So if we're looking at a local area plan, that site needs to be considered. He goes on, the search for a new suitable site, which can take up to 3 to 5 years from initial search to opening, means that if we've only got 7 years of current supply, then by the time that a new site is commissioned, we'll have less than 2 years before it's full. It also suggests that a small site as proposed in Great Haddon would not make economic sense, as the initial development cost would be prohibitive, which begs the question, why was that included in the approved planning for Great Haddon, and why wasn't greater emphasis placed on it? Cemetery sites, amongst other infrastructure, should absolutely be considered at the same time as a local plan. And if it's going to be considered at the same time as the local plan, then we should have sight of the documentation around it so that we can scrutinise it. This would ensure that development includes funding for community infrastructure, amongst other things. Even so, it will be necessary to have actual places on the ground, so it would be appropriate to ensure that there is an expectation that infrastructure such as cemetery, schools, emergency services, bases, etc. are tied carefully into major developments allocations such as large housing schemes. Otherwise, the council may be left with a requirement for facilities and funding from smaller developments to pay for them, but nowhere to actually build them. The bereavement officer's comments in relation to the burial ground designated as part of the Great Haddon development suggest that it might not be appropriate place to develop a cemetery because of possible issues relating to hydrology. However, the council is currently considering an application in Sutton for a Muslim cemetery. I have no issue with a cemetery for single faith use, provided it's in a location which abuts the community it's seeking to serve, which this doesn't. But for the same reasons, the site in Sutton would be similarly not be appropriate due to hydration. Even if the site at Sutton was considered acceptable, this would only cater almost exclusively for the Muslim community, thereby continuing to leave ongoing inadequate provision for non-Muslims. If we for now assume that this site is also unsuitable and does nothing to remedy the situation for anyone other than those of the Muslim faith, we are again left with nothing in terms of ongoing provision according to what we've seen tonight in this plan. I would therefore urge the officers to consider adding this prior to finalising the local area plan so that we can scrutinise it properly for the next process of consultation, and indeed issuing a restricted call for sites for burial grounds specifically. This once again, as others have commented, feels like we're scrutinising part of the story but not the whole one, and that without adequate provision in areas such as this, we are continually setting ourselves up for contentious applications to have to preside over when it could be properly provisioned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Who'd like to take that?
Yes, the provision of cemetery is part of the infrastructure requirements, and when we carried out the call for sites last year, we did ask and suggest that people suggest land to us for cemetery provision. We didn't receive any sites, so there's no land that's been suggested to us as available for cemetery provision. It is quite difficult when assessing sites for cemetery provision because there are set requirements by the Environment Agency, different standards in terms of the water table, flood risk zones. There's lots of technical requirements to make a site suitable. So it's not always easy to find the right sites. But this is something that we've asked people to suggest land to us and nothing has been suggested. So during the consultation, that's an opportunity for that. There is criteria about what makes suitable land for a cemetery that's set at national level that could be used. But if people feel that there needs to be a policy in the draft plan or in the local plan that sets out criteria to assess those sort of planning applications, then as part of the consultation, then please put those comments in, and that's really useful feedback for us to include and look at in the next version.
Thank you. Councillor Day, please.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question now, but then I'm going to ask a question about a different topic a bit later on. Is that all right?
Right,
okay.
thank you.
I'm going to ask about the housing allocated to the west of the showground area at the Milton Estate site, which is earmarked for 570 dwellings. So obviously everyone's aware that the East of England Showground is going to have around approximately 1,500 dwellings on that went through planning and appeals. But that site was originally earmarked for 650. So I want to ask, you know, and we know that both those two applications, because that East of England site came with two applications, I want to ask how accurate are these figures in the local plan? Because initially the figure of 650 was then anything up to under 2,000. So that's my first concern. And we know that both those applications were a departure from the local plan. So how solid are the local plan policies if we need to refer to them in planning? And adding to the new site would then equal a total of 2,070 new homes on the site. This will be in addition to the existing 655 houses in Southgate and Northgate already there on the showground, totalling 2,725 houses. Is this feasible? As we already know that part of that planning application meant that the promoter had to prove that the access, which is supposed to be dealt with at planning, wasn't dealt with. It was given 6 months. Obviously we're coming up to that in April and then again in July. So is this feasible, given we're still waiting for access mitigations? Some, you know, and residents are obviously very concerned about infrastructure as well. So I guess those are my questions. You say 570 dwellings. Will it be that? Will it be 2,000? that's my concern, given what I've dealt with in my ward very recently. Thank you.
I just sort of say a bit about the sort of background. So the current adopted local plan allocates 650 dwellings. In most cases, the figures in the local plan are always indicative, and it's made quite clear that they're an estimate to say how we can meet our targets. And if a planning application comes in for more or less, then that's assessed on its own merit. And it's an estimate, and usually a very good, accurate estimate. But if an application was to come forward that was way over and didn't meet the other policies in the plan, it could be refused on those reasons. And there has been examples where sites have come forward too low that haven't been seen as making the best use of land. For the showground, though, the way the policy was written was to say that was up to 650 because there was issues around transport. But things have moved on since the local plan and since 2019, and those different planning applications have come in. The additional land has been assessed to bring forward the whole showground as part of a wider plan for the area. And as I said, that site has been through the assessment process as well. So.
Thank you. Councillor Ayres, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit of a football fan and have been since I was very young, having attended the Peterborough United ground when it had a wooden stand, and I doubt if anybody else can even remember that. But I was getting worried when I read through this, what are our plans for a football ground, for a stadium which you can use for football and for events, etc., which has been talked of now for some time in this city. And in fact, when we had the previous plan, sort of the setting out the embankment, as it were, there were several options about that. And the only thing I could find about football and pitches was it was in the university mention, where it says that in addition, any future development at the university will result in the loss of the existing regional pool, athletics track and football pitches, and I can see that all of that is appropriate, must include the provision of a new facility of a similar nature and of a similar size in a suitable or on-off-site location. So where would we put a new events stadium of any sort, but in particular for football, please?
Oh, as far as I'm aware, there's been no suggestion for new sports facilities in a stadium. So the plan doesn't include anything about locations for those, but I'm happy to see if I'm wrong on something else.
Well, there certainly was in the master plan, wasn't there? That was drawn up for the embankment, because there were several options about it.
Some options without it.
Or about it, I beg your pardon. But it was in a little bit of competition with the university, where its buildings were going to go as well. And there was a lot spoken about it about 2 or 3 years ago now.
I'm pausing because I don't want to stray off the local plan here, do you know, and I feel like we're getting into kind of individual detail that isn't... It's really good for a general discussion, and I'd really love to have that general kind of regen discussion at some point.
So at what point do we suggest that there should be one? This is joint scrutiny.
Very much as part of the consultation. You know, that's the opportunity, isn't it? In the formal consultation, that, you know, we're coming out here with a draft document, and you know, we need people to feed into that and to raise these issues.
I'm attempting to do that.
Might I suggest, Councillor, when the consultation commences, you put that forward then as an addition kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. In the same way that I agree entirely with Councillor Elsie over the cemetery, because I'd already noted that as well, because I know that some of the churches have no longer got any burial grounds as well in Peterborough. So I think these areas of where we lack this local plan should, at least on a review, be taking it into account.
Might I just say that all the feedback from tonight will be fed to Cabinet for next time out, so for take into account.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a broader point to make, but I'll jump in on something that's quite parochial, and I'll pick up on what my colleague, Councillor Ormston, has mentioned, and indeed Mr McLean from the public presentation. The Green Wedge should be sacrosanct. To put employment land on Palmwell Way, encroaching on that Green Wedge, is a bad move, and I think it should be reconsidered. And that's the view of the local councillors you've had now. Okay, I understand that the call for sites has produced all of these options, and we're at the early stage of consultation, and you're going to get a lot of people suggesting whether the ideas so far are any good, do they make sense and such like. But what I'd like to ask specifically, in the formation of the local plan, what kind of provision for primary care is taken into consideration? Does the Integrated Care Board put forward any thoughts for your consideration? Do we allocate locations for additional primary care? Because it's okay building all these houses, and we need new houses in Peterborough. I'm fully behind growth, both employment land and for population accommodation. But we need doctors as well, and I know they're businesses now, and they only have to put their hand up if they're interested in doing it. But do we allocate space to encourage that kind of proposition? Thank you.
Okay, no, I think good questions about provision of healthcare. So, as I said, the public health team have been involved in commenting on the sites and the plan, and as part of the consultation, the well, I forgot what the new name is, but the group will provide feedback on that. And as like you said, I suppose it is a bit. They are businesses; they'll look to invest where growth takes place. There are policies in the plan, particularly for the larger sites, to say that they should be sustainable. There should be provision for doctors' surgeries, future provision for that. But at this stage, the plan doesn't necessarily identify any particular sites for those uses. But it does say that they should be required to meet the needs of the local community. There is a health policy as well in there.
Yep. Just a quick area, I need to come back, because looking at the plan today, it was quite a read. I didn't get through it all, but most of it I could do to get an overview. Any mention of health seems to mean that people are looking for green space to keep active lifestyles and such like. So, we've got to keep healthy, get that, but sometimes we're not healthy and we do need treatments, and therefore we must take primary care into primary consideration. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Farouk, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a very sort of general question, really, from the Council's point of view. Looking at some of the sites on the location, they're set to fail. So what I want to know is, what is the quota? How much fat do we have on these proposals? And what I mean set to fail is that rejected at a later stage or near future. Some are half-hearted sites, some have no chance sites, with reds on and so on and so forth in earlier discussions. So I think it's crucial that we get the proposals right now. So how much fat do we have on these proposals? In other words, if a particular site gets taken out through consultation and everything, do we still have enough to satisfy that quota, or would we be looking for additional sites?
So, yeah, so if there's feedback that comes back to say sites aren't suitable and they should be removed, there's other alternative options that we'll have to look at, and that will involve looking at sites lower down in our scoring criteria. And that could mean looking at sites that are high risk of flooding. It could mean looking at more sites in villages and expanding more areas like that. But there are other land available, other sites that could be looked at. But we feel we've done the assessment in the process to find the most suitable, sustainable and deliverable sites. But during the public consultation, people can feed their comment back and let us know. And if people want to suggest the alternative approaches, then that's part of the consultation, they can as well.
Yep.
So would it be pertinent not to include, I don't know, maybe another 15% on there? And the quota-wise, the figures we have here now, the sites we have, is that well in excess of what is government outline?
Yeah, I see what your question was there, sorry. Yes, so the local plan is required to set a minimum of 20,120, and that's what national policy says, and we'd be tested to see that we can deliver those sites are deliverable. So the local plan actually over-allocates, and there is a 10% buffer to allow for the fact that some sites may not come forward. So some sites, planning permission may lapse on sites that have already got planning permission. Some sites may just never be finished, never be developed, or they just don't come forward as quickly as we first thought. and therefore there has to be a buffer to allow for that to be taken into consideration. If we were to allocate exactly 20,120 at the examination, the developers promoting sites would argue and say, you're not going to meet your target. That there's an allowance they can see from our statistics of how many sites will lapse each year, and you need to include more to ensure you can meet your target, and you won't be able to meet your 5-year land supply requirement, and there's a risk there that we could be subject to speculative development in the future going forward on sites that we haven't included in the plan. So that's the justification for that. So.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg, please. Shock.
Thank you. Came down quicker than I thought. So I have a two-pronged question, which is, I suppose, around the theme of protections. The first one is about HMOs. That there's an issue with HMOs in the across Peterborough, and we have some areas that are protected through I think it's section 4. Please forgive me if I've got that wrong. Article 4. I got the 4 right, just got the bit before wrong. So the trouble with that is that what it tends to do is just shove those people looking to put up HMOs into those areas that are not protected, and so therefore, dare I say it, it seems to me that there's probably more activity in those areas that are not protected than there would have been if there had been no protection across the city. Are we able to put something in the local plan that gives us better protection against HMOs? That's the first part of my protection question. My second part of my protection question is when it comes to affordable and social housing targets, we see time and time again developers being able to come up with a bit of a wheeze, which means that they don't have to, we'll forget that because actually we've done an assessment in terms of affordability, in terms of the viability of the site, etc., etc. Sometimes I think that if you throw enough money at something, you can get somebody to tell you anything. So, from my point of view, how can we protect that input of social housing, specifically social housing, to meet the needs of the city?
No, thank you. So, yeah, that's sort of 2 parts of the question. I'll start with the HMO question, housing multiple occupation question. This is a new policy in the plan to try and address these issues that you've been raising, and a separate issue to preparing the local plan is Article 4. And the areas here, I wasn't involved in the process, but they were the areas where there was justification to bring in those requirements, and whether there's justification going forward to look at other areas. As I said, it's a separate process to the local plan. But that's why we've introduced a policy that sets up the requirements it provides more guidance for the development management officers when dealing with planning applications. So previously there was a general design policy, but now there's specific requirements for this, so it should help in the future with applications in that sort of area. And then your question about affordable housing, social housing. So the draft policy sets the requirement for 30% affordable housing on sites of 15 or more dwellings, which is the same as the current local plan requirement. We've commissioned studies to look at housing need and also viability to test all the different asks in the local plan, to ensure that what we're asking for, it can all be delivered. It's not site specific, but it is a very general level looking to see what can be achieved, and 30% is the maximum level of affordable housing that could be asked for without impacting on other requirements, other asks. It does say in national policy that it's subject to viability, and that's something that we have to allow the developers, if they bring forward viability, to do so and have to test. But the policy does say the requirement for 30% affordable housing. There's now changes with the national policy level with the new government, and more emphasis on delivering social rent as well. And we also do have a number of sites coming forward that are more than 30%. They're sites that are being delivered by housing associations. So there's being a higher number of affordable houses delivered from bringing forward individual sites rather than from developer contributions. So there are other ways to increase the housing numbers. But does anyone else want to?
No? Cool, we'll carry on. For the benefit of the public and for me, please, could you try and avoid acronyms or define what they are? Because I never remember them. Thank you very much. I know that one. Councillor Boyce, please.
Thank you, Chair. You're pleased to know I only have 2 other questions. It appears the local plan working group accepted suggestions that Wittering should be included in the site's allocation element of the draft plan. This has now been dismissed, and the potential opportunity for the creation of a desperately needed flyover over the A1 for residents of Wittering could now be lost. Can officers please tell me why this suggested allocation has now seemingly been abandoned?
No, thank you, yes. So we looked at all different options and when there was a requirement for an urban extension or new settlements, and we looked and assessed and compared all the different options, and those were put to the local plan member working group. And I can confirm, yes, that was their preference. The local plan member working group don't have any, they're not decision-making powers. They suggested their comments to us. But taking into consideration their views and also all the other evidence, the difference between the sites was the fact about deliverability. The site at Wittering will take a lot longer to come forward. There's much more infrastructure required in terms of transport and transport access. There wouldn't be any development could happen without major upgrades to the highways. And it was felt that it was in terms of deliverability that the Castro Nailsworth site would bring forward and deliver the growth within the plan period, where the Wittering site wouldn't achieve the targets required. So that was the main justification.
Thank you. My last question. It seems Glinton, a medium-sized village, has been allocated 2 large potential sites in the draft plan. One of these has already been refused by planning officers, and the other may well also be refused. It will be obvious to even casual observers, let alone residents, who this will affect, that the inclusion of these sites is completely inappropriate. Why have these been included?
So again, as I said, all the available sites have been assessed, and there's been a detailed assessment process. I think it's important.
Okay, one meeting, please, Councillor Hogg. One meeting, please.
I think it's important to note that the planning application process, determining a planning application and the local plan are obviously very linked, but the process of preparing a local plan and the process of determining planning applications are separate processes and work to different timescales. So the planning applications are assessed against the plan, the currently adopted local plan, and at this early stage in the process, I went through the presentation, is giving limited weight in determining planning applications. So because it hasn't been through its consultation stage, so there's several steps to go forwards before that can be used in determining planning applications in that way.
Thank you. Councillor Day, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to commend this report in terms of its climate change and environment pledges. I think things like the above building regs, the higher, the 20% rather than 10% biodiversity net gain is all brilliant and should be welcomed. But I just, around that, I wanted to pick out a particular site that I've got concerns with. This is on LP 49 and it's point 13, and it's a site on London Road which happens to be the Green Backyard community garden. I'm really concerned that while we, it's this Green Backyard is so valuable as community space, not just as community space for growing but also holding events and festivals. It's really valued as part of the community. It's one of the only urban city centre spaces like that. And I think to lose that for 48 dwellings would be a real incredible shame. So I just wanted to ask some questions around that decision-making process. Are we really prepared to lose that facility, which will bring health and community benefits and well-being benefits for just under 50 homes?
Yeah, so all the sites have been assessed against the different assessment criteria to take all those things into consideration. And I suppose it's because it's a brownfield site in the city centre. I want to ensure that we're regenerating sites and bringing those forward. And that's the justification, but again, it's a consultation, so people can make those comments.
Thank you. Co-opting member Sanford, please.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions about the policies in the plan, because I think it's important that we do look at those. Before I ask the question, though, I'd just like to comment on on the question that Councillor Ayres asked about the Peterborough United ground, because I'd refer members to policy LP 30 on embodied carbon, which is actually saying that if this plan goes through, there'll be a presumption against the demolition of buildings and the encouragement of reusing buildings. So would that mean then, if the Peterborough United Football Club were to come forward with an application to demolish their existing ground and build a completely new ground on the embankment, which is seemingly what they're proposing, that would be contrary to LP 30? Could you?
So yeah, LP 30 is a new policy that's been introduced to help meet our climate change ambitions, and it does say that that's the preference should be to reuse, rebuild, and it would be for that to be that would be the first preference, and it would be up to people to justify why that wouldn't be possible, but that would be the preference to reuse.
Thank you. The actual questions I got though was in relation to policy LP 10, which is regards energy efficiency and in housing. Now, it seems to say in the policy that you're actually going to do what's required in the future home standard, and it says that that is possibly going to require solar PV on them houses, which was actually really positive. But I just want to point out that the future home standard in its final form hasn't yet been published, so we don't know for certain that's going to be included. So will you be including those elements regardless of whether it's in the future home standard, or will you just be complying with whatever the future home standard says? And just going back to a point that I think Councillor Boyce made, and it was mentioned at full council last night, that if you drive into Peterborough, you see these signs saying Peterborough is the environment capital of the country. So if we want to be the environment capital, if we want to be an exemplar, shouldn't we be going for full zero carbon housing? And I actually was talking to somebody earlier this morning from South Oxfordshire Council, and they're including in their local plan a commitment to zero carbon housing.
Yeah, I think very good questions, some good points there. So to start, I'm trying to remember what the first point, I'm trying to remember the questions. The first point about the future home standards. So this policy, the draft page draft stage has been drafted to take account of what we know at the moment. Current national policy is still quite restrictive in how far you can push above building regulations. And if we were to go for more than building regulations, we'd have to have sufficient evidence to justify that. And that would where the difficulty would come with in terms of viability in Peterborough. We'd have to do more work to look at whether that could be achieved, and that would impact on whether or not we can meet our affordable housing targets, the BNG targets, other requirements that we'd put on developers. So it's all a balance of what can be achieved and what's the best solution for Peterborough. Yeah, a good point about the future home standards. We don't know, and we've put in as much as we can. When that comes out, we can review, understand what that means, and whether that's something, if there's the opportunity to go higher or not, and if there is, what that means in terms of viability. So it was something, once that's available, we'll be able to review, hopefully, for the proposed submission version. But very good points.
If I could just you just ask a follow-on from that. If you refer to policy LP 29, it talks about opportunities for like renewable energy, either wind or solar. You're choosing within the plan not to actually allocate any sites for large-scale wind or solar, but to rely on developers actually coming forward. Could you explain that? And sort of going on from that, one of the great opportunities, I think, for actually having more solar is actually where you have commercial development, maybe warehouses and that sort of thing. So is there anything within the plan that will actually encourage that?
Yes, so the plan doesn't allocate sites because for wind farm and things like that, the areas weren't suggested to us. But there are requirements to say how they could come forward. And yes, again, the policy does encourage in future for builder, particularly for industrial uses, to have solar panels on roofs and things like that as part of the policy and the requirements.
Thank you. Councillor Ayres, apologies if I cut across you before. I didn't realise I had further questions.
Thank you. I'm on the climate change mention as well, please. Just worrying slightly that this whole draft plan you have mentions it constantly, and I accept entirely that it's one of the major priorities for this council at the present. However, I am noticing in the newspapers and generally with the national government, the present national Labour government, and also with the Conservatives, that there is talk of not having quite as much go in climate change coming early on, before sort of 2035 or whatever. There's lots of changes have happened, and I keep reading about it, and how there's a different attitude. Now, what happens if our plan has got it continually going through it? When would it get reviewed if the government changes, or the government changes its view on what we should be doing in the UK? What do we do about our plan then?
Yes, I think it depends on how the government changes things, but if the policies will be in here and they would be up to date, and that's what the decisions we made on planning applications, and we could still have those ambitions in our plan. But I suppose, yeah, the plan is to be reviewed every 5 years following adoption. So in 5 years' time, if those things aren't the same, then in the review they'll be looked at differently. But at this stage, that's the ambition. That's what's coming out from government, and that's what we want to include in the draft plan, in the proposed submission version as well.
Is that okay? Yeah, of course.
There's just one more. There's another thing that concerned me, which is on page 44, and it's 5.32. It talks about the council believes there's a future potential for growth in the west of the authority, which of course I'm in the West Ward, etc., around the A1, A47, and would like to work with landowners who have already suggested sites as part of the council's call for sites exercise in this area, and infrastructure providers over the coming years to consider potential allocation in the next local plan. Then I read a bit later on that when there is a sort of potential site that's being considered, that gets taken into consideration in any other actual planning application that comes along. And I just wondered where that was in particular, because obviously it's got to be somewhere different to the Castor and Aylesworth site, because we know all about that.
Well, I think the plan is, the local plan is set over a 20-year period, and some of the larger big urban extensions will take time to come forward. And as was mentioned earlier in discussions about the other alternative options for urban extensions, new settlements, it's trying to future-proof that so that we can, the council can talk to the infrastructure providers to think about what might be needed in the future beyond the plan period, and thinking ahead for a review of what infrastructure could be required to support future growth.
I'm not just talking about infrastructure here. It looked to me like it was relating to sites, not just for infrastructure, but on the A1, A47.
Yeah.
And because I live at Wansford as well, so are you able to tell us where those sites are?
Well, it says potential sites that have been already suggested, so other sites as part of the call for sites in that area, that big extensions that may take years to come forward. If work could start earlier to look forward to try and bring infrastructure to ensure that they could be available for future plan reviews.
So it is a big site?
Yes.
Further along from Castor and Aylesworth? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wiggin, please.
Thank you, Chair. You've caught me out. I'm clearly catching up from my group leader. I'm also looking at climate change, but in a different way and the transport aspect. The plan policies continue our approach to try to reduce car use, which is good. That's what we've been working towards. We know we have various issues with congestion in the city, as have been detailed by others earlier, and more houses means more cars. My area of Hampton has the highest car density in Peterborough, despite having the least car parking spaces. But my concern is that the policies about reducing car use aren't matched with policies on supporting other modes of transport. For instance, in LP28, the safeguarded land for future infrastructure, there are two plans for increasing road infrastructure, which are needed in the areas, one on walking and cycling, nothing for buses, nothing for railway infrastructure. We've probably missed the boat completely on a railway station in Hampton, which was originally in the 106 agreement for the Hampton site. It was in the previous local plan, then was taken out, and I think that land is now gone. But how are we looking to marry up that infrastructure plan with our aspirations on reducing car use if we haven't got any land safeguarded for railway stations, park and rides, potential future bus depots if they're not in the plan?
Okay, yeah, I think that they're good points and things that could be raised as part of the consultation, so to make sure that we can take account of the need for that type of infrastructure as well. I think that's an important point.
Thank you. Councillor Blakemore-Creedon, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gemma, for your presentation. I would like to go back to page 81, which is the HMOs, House of Multiple Occupations. I'd like to ask a question about what specific evidence of HMOs related issues, such as overconcentration, antisocial behaviour or community impact, led to Fullerton and Woodston, Hampton and Park area being included in the Article 4 direction.
I wasn't involved in the Article 4, so I'm not sure I could answer that, and I don't think Ingrid or others are here, but that's something we can go back and find and get an answer for you on that point.
Yes, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take it as an action on that one. Thank you. Councillor Fitzgerald, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. A couple of points, be very quick points, but I think for the benefit of people that have not been through the local plan before, because some of the earlier comments seem to suggest that the scrutiny function and or consideration of the plan is not clear to people. So first thing, the most contentious bit of this is always sites, as you will know, because everybody acts NIMBYs for whatever bit they're coming from. It is a common suggestion, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but people have to recognise that actually there are conflicts of interest within all our wards, whether it's councillors, whether it's individuals, and our job is to take a more holistic view and a wider, we talked about it last night, about inward looking or outward looking. So the first thing, just remind me, so after the consultation, Gemma, which everybody can put in their points, councillors, members of the public, everybody, and all the documents are available, you then draw together a plan to take to council. Am I correct?
So the next version of the plan will have to be approved by full council, yes.
Which then goes to the inspector. Okay. So everybody can say their piece about what should be in and what should be out. Who is making the decision? So, for example, when somebody says here, I don't like that site being in. If council vote for that site to come out, it comes out, presumably. But with the caveat that if it affects the numbers or the viability of the plan, something else has to go in. It's a bit like the budget, yes?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Okay. And all your site assessment will be public. You're making those documents public. So nobody's losing out. It still comes together in a council meeting, which council have to agree to that plan. Can developers and landowners make representations to the inspector after we've approved it? As to why something wasn't included?
Yes, so when the the next version, the proposed submission version, will go to Cabinet to recommend and then full council, who will approve it as the plan they'd like to see adopted, but then it will go out for another 6 weeks public consultation. And it's important, perhaps I didn't make that in clear in my presentation, at that stage, people's comments aren't just general comments, they have to be on the soundness of the plan, which is a technical planning term, but it has to say why it doesn't meet certain tests, and you have to be quite specific, and those are then submitted to the planning inspector. And so if there are landowners, developers that sites aren't in, they have the same right to submit their objections to say why and justify why their site should be in, and that should be presented to the planning inspector, and it's then the planning inspector that listens and balances those views.
I'm only asking this, Chair, because a lot of people won't know this, and this is being recorded, to map out the process. Then it comes back to us after the inspector, and we adopt it.
And at that stage, there's recommendations from the inspector, and the council can't decide to change anything. They have to adopt as the recommendations or not. That's the only options at that stage.
Fine. I think that's perfectly clear. So everybody has ample opportunity, both the public and councillors, to make their voice heard collectively or individually. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Councillor Howard, please.
I don't know if I can speak with the same clarity, but I'll try. So I just wanted to talk about the showground again, because I know that the whole essence of the application for the showground has already been contentious, and that's bearing in mind there is a fair degree of leisure and recreation within the application that's going through at the moment. So what I just wonder for your thoughts, because obviously adding that extra section now potentially into the plan, are you pressurising that original site in that someone could come back with something far denser in residential than we're already talking through and we've already thought through the planning committee, and we could actually end up with something with less leisure provision, potentially, because you're now going to potentially pocket that as a super site? I just appreciate your thoughts on that, because knowing how hard it's been to get to this point already, it'd be really sad if that site comes back with something more intense than we've already seen.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point to make there. The additional land, as it's all been assessed, for it would be a total of 2,000 across the whole showground site, and that does take into account the two existing applications, or I've forgotten what stage they're at, but the ones that have been approved subject to Section 106 and the transport assessments. As I said, they are indicative numbers, as always in the local plan. We always have to caveat that. So a development could come in for more, but they'd have to be able to fully justify that and explain why, and show that it's not going to prejudice the loss of other uses and things on the site, so that would be part of the planning application process to justify that.
Okay.
If I could just come back.
Of course, yeah.
Right? I just wonder if, in my view, that one would be better as a potential windfall site rather than pressurise what's already going on in that location already with something else that looks like a really appetising number for someone. That's my only sort of thought and contribution on it. But thank you.
I was just going to say thank you for the comments. I didn't know. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Farouk, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, a general question, really. While you're preparing this document, have you been talking to the neighbouring authorities with devolution in mind? Because we don't want to put all of our cards up front. You know, as Peterborough go on to dig new sites, when you find that, for instance, neighbouring locations, Huntingdonshire, for instance, got a huge employment land on right-hand side of A1, which they're looking to make available, and that will satisfy more than enough criteria. So we don't want to really press the local plan and try to deliver too many houses too quickly with no infrastructure. And, you know, frankly, Councillor Howard and myself, we present Hampton Ward, one of the fastest growing. Every week we walk down the road, we see a new street coming along. And that growth simply does not deliver prosperity. I mean, if I just give you a simple example, a family moving in with 2 children, maximum income I'm going to get in the council is 3 grand, 4 grand for the council tax. Yet immediately I have to write a check of 7 grand for their older child to go to a secondary school, 5 grand for their primary school, and all the other services which go with it. So I think, of course, it's our legal obligation now to deliver this local plan, but we need to keep the devolution in mind, and particularly also pay attention to the local plan going forward to 2042 rather than 2044. That will also reduce the pressure of another 2,000 houses we need we need to deliver. So perhaps bear those things in mind. Thank you.
Yes, so just say about it's part of the requirements for preparing a local plan that you have to, it's called duty to cooperate, you have to work with the adjoining authorities, neighbouring authorities. And one of the reasons, because there isn't sort of the strategic level of planning there used to be, is to say to an authority to discuss whether or not you can share growth. And that's one of the discussions that's had at that point. And we have met with all the adjoining authorities to discuss. Some of them are preparing plans themselves as well. And as part of the consultation statutory requirement that we formally consult them in terms of duty to cooperate as well. So that's all being considered and taken into account. And bearing in mind devolution, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Skipstead, please.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I'm going to go back to the HMOs that Councillor Hogg was referring to. Given that there's a new policy now, I'm assuming that's for, that will be, in most of cases, it'll be just for HMOs that are over 6 people. So would there be a strong weighting given to the areas where there isn't an Article 4 direction, given that those areas are already seeing more HMOs being pushed out, because that's where they can still do them. There's some areas where there is a high concentration, and if they were to be applying for one that was at 6 or more, would that new policy be applied firmly to those? Would that be taken into consideration in those areas? That's my first question.
Yeah, so the new policy about HMOs, it does. So in terms of how you change use with a planning application, you don't have to apply to create a HMO that's less than 7 units. So above, so that the policy applies in areas other than where there's the Article 4 for that way. And it does say about over-concentration, and that's something that can be taken into consideration in the planning application. And if there are areas where there's evidence of increase and need for other Article 4 directions, I mean, that's something that in the future could be considered by the council, but we would need to have the sufficient evidence to justify that and what areas that could include.
Thank you. I have a question relating to primary shopping areas. So this is 9.16, change of use in town centres. It's about the gaming, trying to prevent a concentration of gaming shops and gambling and that sort of thing. It says the PSAs will seek to prevent a concentration. Will that be applied quite firmly within the planning process? Because I've seen it happen recently where there was objections, but it went through anyway. And I can see that, for example, Bridge Street has got a high proportion of that, and it would be nice to have areas with more community more community feel, with better shops. I just wondered if that's going to be actively policed, if you like.
Yes, so that was one of the reasons why bringing that into this new policy because there's been an increase in the need, and that's one of the issues that was raised. And I think it's an important issue that we need to ensure is taken forward in planning applications. Yeah.
I just have one final point. Regarding the consultation, I've just been made aware by members of the public that a lot of people have no idea about this, and I just wondered, I know it's on the website, is there any way it can come out more generally to the public who are actually quite engaged, quite interested when you tell them, oh, I didn't know there was a local plan. Is there any way that can be more fed out? Can it go in the Peterborough Telegraph? I just don't know. Are there other avenues where it could be more advertised? Thank you.
So, because obviously the consultation hasn't started yet, we don't have the approval. But once the consultation starts in April, that will be notified. So there will be publicity, there will be news articles and information sent out to try and engage with as many people as we can. And the council does have a statement of community involvement which sets out how we have to consult and who we have to consult with. So that's all part of the process we'll tend to take.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor McNally, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Just want to return to this HMO. I know it's been mentioned quite a lot tonight. But what are the considerations when you're granting a licence do you consider? Parking, for example. I, for one, will leave this building tonight. I've got a concentration of HMOs where I live, and I know a lot of people have around the Breton area. I will go home tonight, and I won't be able to park anywhere. I will have to park 2 or 3 streets away on a bit of grass normally, and people hate that. So what considerations are taken into account? Thank you.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why we've introduced a new policy specifically about that, to ensure that can be taken into consideration in planning applications, and car parking is one of the biggest issues that usually comes up with that.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg, please.
Thank you. You alluded earlier to the fact that when it hits consultation that it's not going to be in this format, it's going to be in a different format, there's going to be a bit more of an interactive feel to it. One of the things that it's not always explicit what a site is my point. So, for instance, there's been previously pointed out about the Green Backyard site, which I absolutely echo the thoughts of Councillor Day on the uses, specifically with the extra urbanisation that's happening in that area. You're looking at Pleasure Fair Meadow car park. I'm not seeing the gravel car park site on here. Maybe I've missed it. I don't know. That's on London Road. That's currently leased to the football ground, I believe. But that was potentially going to be a site for regeneration as well. So my point is that London Road, Peterborough, it's a very long road. It could be anywhere. So can we be more specific with some of our descriptions so that people can actually see that this is the site of the Green Backyard rather than just a nondescript London Road, Peterborough? I think that, you know, and there are plenty of other examples. I'm not going to name them all, but there are quite a few others. I mean, clearly Pleasure Fair Meadow car park, we know what that is. It says what it is on the tin. We know exactly what that site is. Yeah, it's just making sure that people do have the ability to actually work out what that is. I mean, will we be able to press a button and up will come a map?
Microphone. So, yeah, on the screen here is the interactive map. This is showing all the sites that are suggested to us and marked for different uses and things. But we can, yeah, that's what will be made public. There will be an interactive version, and there's a link in the map so people can see that.
Okay.
And you'll be able to click on the site, and it will bring up basic site information and zoom in and see a bit more. So there'll be a printed map as well, but that'll be much clearer for people to be able to actually go and see. And we've created so there'll be as I said, the PDF full plan, but there'll also be a shorter summary version. And as you sort of scroll through that story map, it is when you get to the sites will pop up, and that's interactive as well. So we're trying to make it as easy and as user friendly for the public. So.
Just on the point I made earlier about the gravel car park site, has that come off the plan now? Or is it in a different section?
Oh, so the car park in front of the football ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the current local plan that's sort of part of a wider regeneration of that area.
Yeah.
This plan is more specific in terms of sites, but there is that could come forward as windfall allowance, I suppose, if that site was to come forward, but it's not included as a particular site because it wasn't suggested to us this time.
Okay. So, I mean, probably potential for swapping that for the Green Backyard then?
If people want to make that comment in part of the consultation, then they can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Competent Member Sanford, please.
Thank you. I just got a couple of questions on the natural environment part of the plan. And before I ask the questions, I just wanted to endorse...
Excuse me, Councillor Day. Sorry to interrupt, Nick. Are you going to the law or you leave? If you leave the meeting, we can't carry on anymore because we are minimum numbers now. But you can leave to the loo if you like. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. As long as you're coming back. So, can you not hear me? Speed it up. Why is that? Sorry. People are asking questions though. So. Sorry.
She's just leaving at the point I was about to commend her actually for because she actually mentioned earlier on that the council in the local plans going for 20% biodiversity net gain, which is actually really good because the legal requirement's only half of that. So I'd like to commend the people that put together the plan on that. When I was a councillor, I used to have a reputation for asking questions about trees, so I'm not going to disappoint you. So it's actually policy LP 41, trees, woodlands and hedgerows. There are a couple of quite significant points though. In that policy, it says that where a development will result in the loss or deterioration of sort of either ancient woodland or ancient trees, permission will be refused unless on an exceptional basis the benefits of the development outweigh those provisions. So the question I wanted to ask is that that appears to be quite a strong policy, and it says that development to affect ancient woodland must only be allowed in exceptional circumstances. The problem is in the national planning framework, I think it's paragraph 193, it says that development affecting ancient woodland will only be allowed in wholly exceptional circumstances. So I think if you go to a planning inspector with a policy phrase like that, you may run the risk of it being deemed to be contrary to national policy. And so that's one thing to think about. The other thing is there's a requirement on page 124. It talks about that all developments are going to be expected to deliver an increase in tree canopy cover, and it says proposals should include a minimum of 15%. Now, I was talking to some ex-colleagues at Woodland Trust, and that they were telling me that they actually advocate that it should be 30%, and that they quoted that there's a number of councils across the country, Bristol, Birmingham, Sheffield, and Plymouth included in that, who actually go for 30%. So going back to this point about us being an exemplar, why are we looking to be average and not going for an exemplar figure?
So on your first point about the ancient trees, this is the same time we haven't updated that part of the text as it is in the existing policy. But if national policy's changed, or you think that needs to be stronger to fit with national policy, then that's a point to make during the consultation, a very valid point to make during the consultation. In terms of the tree policy, this is a new requirement, and it fits with Natural England's requirements for natural green space and the infrastructure requirements, green infrastructure requirements. We've set a target of 15. That's information that's been looked at through the green infrastructure study. But if it's felt that should be higher, then that's comments that can be made. But I think we have to balance all those sort of requirements of what can be delivered on site and different issues. But if there's evidence to suggest that should be higher, that could again be made during the public consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Wiggin, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about Appendix 4 car parking standards, particularly with regard to C2 children's homes. We've had a couple of applications recently that have been rejected on the version of this in the current plan because there isn't enough parking space. And the planning officer's report stated that the requirements on children's homes are actually more than I believe is detailed in this proposed appendix. So I just wanted to check that my understanding is right. It says one space for full-time equivalent staff. So assuming that's based on either 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 care for a child, but actually they tend to work 8 or 12-hour shifts, and they're having changeovers, and the assumption is particularly for night shifts is that there is no public transport available. So the planning officers have stated that they need more spaces for handover time. So is that taken into account in these figures?
I'm not sure. I don't think any of us here have involved in this policy. We'll have to go back and look and work out and find some more information on that. But if you're concerned about that, again, that's an opportunity to make that as part of the consultation.
Thank you. Any further questions, please? No? May I ask a couple? Is that all right? Councillor Skipstead mentioned about the town centre and the policy of prevent an over-concentration of adult games, etc. I realise the town centre is the focal point, but can that not be looked at citywide to do that sort of thing? And also, I probably shouldn't say this, but can we include vape retailers? Because no one knows of the health aspect of that, plus the litter around those bleeding packets as well. So can we look at that, please?
When it talks about town centres, it does refer to the local centres and district centres defined in the plan. So it is anywhere where there's a retail centre. And good point about the vaping and that's vape shops. That's something that if people want to make those comments again during the consultation, I think that's a very valid point to make, yeah.
Super duper, thank you. One final question. This has come from Councillor Anne Shahid. In 30 years of marriage, I'm still listening to her, folks. Realise that. Make sure you tell her that. I'll listen to what she said. On page 63, it says 64 dwellings on Brookside playing field. We've been informed that the Queen Catherine Academy has a 25-year lease on this land. Is that still the case, or has that changed now?
I'm not aware. I don't know. The site was suggested to us by the council, but I'm not sure of the lease arrangements. Anyone else does? Perhaps something we could look into and come back.
Okie dokie. Excellent. Any further questions at all? Right, ladies and gents, it is recommended that the Joint Scrutiny Committee review the draft plan as part of the public consultation process, which we've just done. Thank you very much. Councillor Farouk?
Are we able to, Chair, are we able to put a recommendation in or at this stage?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So if I may, please. Just to build on earlier my few questions, I think it's crucial that we get this document right when it goes to public. We are a professional organisation. We need to not cause any dramas. You know that particular sites, if they get a lot of people in, and then what that also has is negative impact on other sites, which are very likely and should be developed. So if people see people jumping up and down and standing around, for instance, people from Flatton may join in, and it could jeopardize the whole thing. So I think it's crucial that for the smooth running, we must present a very good document, 95% accurate or more. And I know Councillor Fitzgerald mentioned earlier about, well, look, whatever it comes to council decision. To me, that's a little bit too late. It comes to council, councillors reject a particular thing, then you're almost like kicked back again. So what I want to do, I know it's not my ward, I represent Hampton, and Hampton is a great development. My recommendation is, Charlotte, the Castor site should be taken out of local plan for following reasons. Wildlife rejection, 2 reds, 1 red is normally enough to reject it. Thirdly, key papers are missing. And fourthly, the infrastructure cost could be 100 million. So I think, for me, I think it's crucial to get that right now and have the right site in for the local plan to be successful. Yeah, that number was floated, but you could leave that part. You could just use the other 3 reasons.
Popping up. Where does
Sorry,
that number come from?
can Charlotte just...
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, sorry, Councillor. Yeah. Councillor Thurman, sorry, can you... What are you saying? Sorry.
Tonight, everyone keeps talking about 100 million. I just don't understand where that number's coming from. It seems to be floating around. I've got no idea where that came from.
Sorry, just to answer that part. That was through the meetings, but you could leave that part out. You can include the other 3 reasons then. Wildlife rejection, 2 reds, and key papers missing.
Bear with us, please. Right, if we could take a vote on that, please.
I think you need a seconder first.
Oh, sorry. Councillor
happy
Bush,
to second that.
thank you. And can we take a vote on Councillor Farouk's recommendation, please? Can you go with the wording again, please?
Read it again. The Castor site should be taken out of local plan for following reasons. Wildlife trust rejection, 2 reds, where 1 red is normally enough to reject, and key papers missing. An alternative site should be found at this stage to ensure that the professional documents are presented to public.
Could you forward that wording to Charlotte, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, are all those in favour of Councillor Farouk's recommendation, please? Can you hold your green cards up? Against, please? 2, 3, 4. And abstentions now, please. Right, could abstentions please raise their cards again, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Fox, did you vote? You was in the toilet. Would you like us to repeat the recommendation, because we do have to take the vote with the full numbers? Sorry, Councillor Farouk, please can you repeat?
Yeah, the Castor site should be taken out of local plan, and more suitable alternative sites should be found at this stage for following reasons: wildlife rejection, 2 RADs, and key papers missing. So only Judy.
Right, thank you. Councillor Hogg?
I'd like to make a recommendation, if I may.
Bear with a moment, please.
Sorry, I have to announce the outcome of that recommendation first before we do. So thank you, members. So in the recommendation proposed by Councillor Farouk and seconded by Councillor Boyce, 6 for, 4 against and 9 abstentions. Therefore, the recommendation carries.
Councillor Hogg, what you got for us?
So I've got a recommendation which is to remove LP 13, which is the London Road site, which is otherwise known as Green Backyard, and have it replaced with the site as previously stated, the gravel car park at London Road. I won't prescribe how many units you want to be able to put on that land, but I think you can probably put a decent amount on there in terms of high-rise housing. I feel that the Pleasure Fair Meadow car park, the land opposite the Pleasure Fair Meadow car park, otherwise known as the Green Backyard, provides vital green open space for residents in a very high density population area. It's not just a green open space. There's the number of different attributes that happen there. There's market gardening, there's gardening sites for people. It's a meeting place for a plethora of different organisations, childcare. There's the Pride March goes from there every year, and there's a Pride evening, Pride event on the site. So it's very multi-use, and I feel that it would be to the detriment of certainly the people that live in my ward if that was to go down. So on the basis of we'll take out, we'll put back in, that is my amendment.
For clarity, amendment or new recommendation?
A recommendation.
Thank you.
Sorry.
And from the preamble, I'm going to repeat what I think your recommendation is. The committee removes LP 4913, the London Road site, otherwise known as the Green Backyard, and replace it with Gravel Road car park on London Road.
Thank you. We've got a seconder for that, please. Councillor Healy, thank you. Councillor Thompson, did you want to come in on something there?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted a point of clarification so I've got it right in my head. These recommendations are just going to the Cabinet meeting on Monday, and they'll decide whether to accept them or not. Yeah, fine, thank you. I think that's important with for the public perception and transparency.
Sorry, no, that's not correct, apparently.
Yeah, so for clarity, these recommendations will be put forward as part of the public consultation, and then as the consultation moves through its processes, they will be addressed.
Ooh, more power than I thought we had.
Don't say you're going to put recommendation out because of that. Yeah? All right, cool. Right, all those in favour of Councillor Hogg's recommendation, please. Can you keep it down if we try to count, please? Because you lose the concentration easily. Thank you. Keep up, please. Cards raised high, please. All those against? None. Any abstentions?
Can I just ask a question on what Charlotte has said? Because I appreciate I don't have a vote here, but I thought that given the fact the Cabinet meeting was adjourned, any recommendations from this meeting should go to the Cabinet so they can take it into account as to whether to include these recommendations in the published version of the plan. But you were saying it would only go in as part of the public consultation.
Is Cabinet going to be sent all of the outcomes and feedback from this meeting for their meeting on Monday? What Cabinet are being asked to do on Monday is approve the plan for public consultation. The joint scrutiny recommendation that is before you tonight is for it to be included as part of that public consultation. So Cabinet will see the recommendations made, but they will be used to inform the public consultation process for when the next draft is presented to that next stage.
Thank you, Charlotte. Can we have the results of that vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the delay. It was 14 voting for, 0 voting against and 5 abstentions. Therefore, the recommendation carried.
Thank you. You can clap now if you want. Nice one. Any further comments from anyone? No? Thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. I've still got to do the recommendation, apparently. It says recommended that the Joint Scrutiny Committee review the draft plan as part of the public consultation process, which we have done. Huge thank you for Gemma for fielding those questions. Much appreciated. And thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.